Amelia Parker burned the letter the morning they told her it was a joke. She stood alone in the yard while her cousins laughed through the window, her hands shaking, smoke curling up from the paper, like the last piece of herself she was willing to let them take. She had been sent to a mountain cowboy nobody wanted by a family who never wanted her. But she did not cry. She picked up her bag. She walked to the station. And she never once looked back. If that kind of quiet courage speaks to you, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 arrived in Clover Creek, Missouri, the way it always did, loud, golden, and full of itself. The town square was strung with paper banners for the Harvest Festival that everyone called a summer celebration, even though it was barely July, and families crowded the streets in their good clothes and children chased each other between the market stalls, and the whole place smelled like fry bread and horses and someone's ambition. Amelia Parker smelled it from inside the house. She was not at the festival. She had not been invited to the festival. Technically, no one had told her she was not allowed, but no one had knocked on her door either, and in Clover Creek, that amounted to the same thing. She sat at the kitchen table with a pile of mending that was not hers, working a needle through a torn seam on her cousin Ruth's good dress. The one Ruth was wearing to the festival. The one Ruth had dropped on Amelia's chair that morning. Without a word, the way you drop something on a stump and walk away. Ruth was 23 and considered pretty by Clover Creek standards. She had high color in her cheeks and a laugh that carried across a room. She had never once thanked Amelia for anything. Neither had Dorothea, the older one. Dorothea was 29 and called herself a woman of the world because she had traveled to St. Louis twice and come back both times with opinions about people she had never spoken to. Amelia was 27. She had not been to St. Louis. She had not been much of anywhere. Her father had died when she was 11. Her mother had followed 4 years later, worn down by grief and the kind of poverty that didn't announce itself, but just steadily took things first. The good furniture, then the warm coat, then the pride. Amelia had been passed to her aunt's household after that, where she was given a small room and a clear understanding that her place there was conditional on her usefulness. She mended. She cooked. She kept accounts when her uncle's bookkeeping fell behind. She was thanked for none of it. She was not ugly. That was the thing that confused people who looked at her too quickly and thought they understood. She was quiet, and she wore her hair pulled back, and she did not dress in the way that demanded attention, but she had good eyes, dark and steady, and hands that moved with the kind of precision that comes from years of doing everything carefully, because you cannot afford to do anything twice. She was simply the kind of woman a certain kind of person decides not to see. And in Clover Creek, most people had made that decision a long time ago. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Amelia found it first, which was not unusual. She was always up before Ruth and Dorothea, always the one who walked to the end of the road to collect whatever the post had delivered. She brought the letters in and set them on the table the way she always did, and she would not have thought anything of it, except that this one was addressed to the household in general, and her aunt was already at the table when she came in, and the look on her aunt's face when she saw the envelope was the kind of look that meant she already knew what was inside. "That came for us," her aunt said. Not a question, not a thank you. Amelia set it down. She found out the contents the way she found out most things in that house, not because anyone told her, but because she listened. That evening, she was in the hallway carrying a basket of pressed linens when she heard Dorothea's voice through the gap under the sitting room door, pitched high with amusement. "It says he's 38, lives alone up in Wyoming somewhere, has a horse ranch." A pause. "Mountain country, real remote. Does he have money?" That was Ruth. "Some. Not a fortune. But the land itself is worth something." Another pause, and then a sound that was half laugh, half something worse. "He's looking for a wife. Put out an advertisement through one of those mail-order brokers. Says he wants someone, and I am reading this directly, someone practical. Someone who knows how to work." Ruth made a sound like she'd bitten something sour. "Well, nobody's going to fight you for that offer." Dorothea laughed. Then she said the thing that Amelia heard so clearly, she later remembered it as if it had been spoken directly into her ear. "You know who we should send, Amelia." Silence. Then Ruth, "You're terrible. I'm serious. Think about it. We send her picture the bad one from the Hendersons' party, and we write him a letter, and we describe her honestly. Plain. Quiet. No prospects. Nobody here wants her. Maybe a lonely mountain man will." The laughter that followed was light, comfortable, the laughter of people who found cruelty easy. "And if he sends her back, well, we'll say she ran off on her own. Nobody will be surprised." Amelia stood in the hallway for a long time after that. She did not move. The basket of linens was heavy against her hip, but she did not set it down. She breathed slowly, the way she had taught herself to breathe when something hit her in the chest, steadily, deliberately, the way you breathe when you have learned that falling apart is a luxury you cannot afford. Then she set the basket down. She walked to the sitting room. She pushed open the door. Dorothea and Ruth both turned. Dorothea had the letter in her hand. Ruth had the look of someone caught doing something she knew was wrong, but had already decided not to care. Amelia looked at her cousin, then at the letter, then back at Dorothea. "Which picture?" she said. Dorothea blinked. "What? Which picture were you planning to send, the one from the Hendersons' party, or the one from Easter?" Her voice was flat, calm, the voice she used when she was working through a column of numbers that wasn't adding up. "Because the Easter one is worse, if you're trying to be accurate." Ruth made a small strangled sound. Dorothea stared at her. "You were listening. I was in the hallway." Amelia looked at the letter. "If you're going to do it right, and give me a copy of what you write." She left the room before either of them could respond. She did not sleep much that night. She lay on her narrow bed in her narrow room, and she looked at the ceiling, and she thought, not about Ethan Blackwood, whose name she had not yet heard, but about the simplest version of the truth, which was this: she had nowhere to go. Not nowhere, as in she lacked options. She was intelligent. She could keep books. She could manage a household. She had skills that should have been worth something. But in Clover Creek in 1884, the value of a woman's skills was measured almost entirely by the desirability of the woman herself. And Amelia had long ago understood that she was not considered desirable. Not by the men who looked past her at the festival. Not by the families who hired her to help with their accounts and then forgot her name by the following season. Not by the cousins who laughed about her in sitting rooms she was not supposed to be able to hear. She was not nothing. She knew that. She held on to that the way you hold on to a fence post in a high wind. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's there, and it's solid, and letting go means going down. But knowing your own worth and having it recognized by the world around you are two entirely different things. She thought about the advertisement. A mountain cowboy in Wyoming. Alone. Rough country. The kind of life that made people leave. She thought, what if I don't leave because I'm unwanted? What if I leave because I choose to? There was a difference. She was not sure anyone else would see it, but she saw it. By morning, she had made up her mind. She went to Dorothea before breakfast. "Send the letter," she said. "But let me read it first." Dorothea, who had clearly expected anger or tears and received neither, was visibly unsettled. "You want to read it before you send it." Amelia stood with her hands folded in front of her, perfectly still. "I want to know what he's being told about me." "Amelia, this is a joke. I know. You said so last night." She met her cousin's eyes without blinking. "Send it anyway." Dorothea sent it. The letter she wrote was not precisely kind. Amelia read it in the hallway before it was sealed. It described her as reliable in practical matters, not given to complaint, plain in appearance, no beauty to speak of, steady-natured, had helped manage the household accounts for several years. No prospects in her current town, willing to relocate. It was the most accurate description of her that anyone in her family had ever written. The fact that it had been written as an insult did not change that. She looked at the Easter photograph her cousin had chosen. She had always hated that photograph. She looked tired in it. She looked like a woman who had been working since before sunrise and had not had enough to eat. She thought, well, that's true too. She let them seal the envelope. 2 weeks passed. Amelia went about her work. She mended and cooked and kept accounts and said nothing to anyone about the letter. She did not let herself think about Wyoming or mountain ranches or lonely cowboys. She kept herself in the present tense, which was the only tense she had ever truly been able to control. The reply came on a Thursday morning just before the heat of the day settled in. Amelia brought it in from the road, the same way she brought in everything quietly without announcement. She set it on the table. She went about her business. She was in the kitchen when she heard Dorothea open the envelope. Then silence. Then, well, Ruth, what does it say? Dorothea read it aloud. Her voice was strange flat, where it should have been amused, careful where it should have been dismissive. The man had written, I don't require beauty. I've seen what beauty without character costs a man. What I require is someone who can work, who does not lie, and who is not afraid of hard country. The description you have provided suggests this woman may be exactly what this ranch needs. I would like her to come to Calder Ridge, Wyoming before the end of June. If she agrees, I will pay for the journey. Her name is Amelia. Tell her I'll be at the station with a blue handkerchief so she knows me. Ethan Blackwood. The kitchen went very quiet. Amelia set down the dish she was drying. She walked to the sitting room doorway. Ruth was staring at the letter like it had said something in a language she did not speak. Dorothea had the look of a person whose joke had just walked back to them wearing a different face. He wants her to come, Ruth said finally. So it appears, Dorothea said. Amelia stood in the doorway. When do I need to leave? Both cousins turned to look at her. You can't actually be considering, Ruth started. When? Amelia said again. She had 4 days to prepare. She did not pack much because she did not have much. One dress for working. One dress that was slightly better than the work dress. A pair of boots that were hers, and a pair of gloves and a hat she had made herself from straw and a ribbon she had found. Her mother's Bible, which she kept not because she was particularly religious, but because it was the last thing she had that her mother had touched. A small notebook she used for accounts. A pen. She went to the bank with the $7.43 she had saved over the course of 4 years from the small amounts her uncle had occasionally pressed into her hand when the accounts came out well. She withdrew it all. She folded it into the inside pocket of her work coat. She said goodbye to her aunt, who gave her a brief, firm embrace and said, Don't embarrass yourself up there. She said goodbye to her uncle, who shook her hand and looked at the floor. She did not say goodbye to Dorothea or Ruth. They stood in the yard watching her go. She heard Dorothea say, just as she turned the corner, He'll send her back inside a week. She kept walking. The train journey took the better part of 3 days. Amelia sat by the window and watched the country change the flat green of Missouri, giving way to the wide broken grasslands of Kansas, and then the long climbing country of Wyoming, where the land rose up and got serious, where the sky got bigger and the wind had an edge to it, even in summer, that told you plainly that this was not a place that made accommodations for softness. She was not soft. That was not what worried her. What worried her was simpler. She was going to a stranger's home, on a stranger's terms, having been described to him not as a person, but as a set of functional characteristics. He wanted someone practical, someone who could survive. She could survive. She had been surviving for 16 years. But surviving and being chosen were different things, and she had never been chosen for anything in her life. She watched Wyoming come toward her through the train window. She thought, I am not going to ask him to choose me. I am going to show him who I am, and I am going to do it without apology, and whatever he decides after that will be what it will be. She believed that, mostly. Calder Ridge was not much of a town. It had a station, a general store, a church, a saloon, and a scattering of houses that looked like they had been set down in a hurry and never quite straightened up. The mountains rose behind it so close and so steep that in the late afternoon the whole place fell into shadow, 2 hours before sunset. Amelia stepped off the train with her bag over her shoulder. The platform was not crowded. A few men in work clothes. A woman with 2 children who looked at Amelia with the brief, sharp assessment of a person who has learned to read strangers quickly. Amelia looked for the blue handkerchief. She found it in the hand of the tallest man on the platform. Howe was standing at the far end, not moving, not scanning the crowd the way people do when they are anxious. He stood like a man who had decided to be somewhere and had no interest in being anywhere else. He was broad through the shoulders, dark-haired with the kind of face that had been outdoors for a long time, sun-weathered, angular, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in at least a week. He was wearing a leather vest over a work shirt, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his arms bore the kind of markings that come from years of physical labor in rough country. Howe was holding the blue handkerchief loosely at his side. He was looking at her. Not the way men usually looked at her, which was to say briefly and then away. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they intend to understand. Amelia walked toward him. She kept her chin level. She did not look away. She stopped 3 feet in front of him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Miss Parker," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "You made it." "I said I would." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but something. "They told me you were plain," he said. She held his gaze. "They told me you were alone." A pause. He looked at her for another moment, still that same level considering look, and then he reached out and took her bag from her shoulder before she could object. "Wagon's out front," he said. "It's an hour's ride to the ranch. You hungry?" "I could eat." "Good." He turned and walked toward the station exit without looking back to see if she was following. "I cooked this morning. It probably isn't what you're used to." She followed him. "Mr. Blackwood." "Ethan." "Ethan." She matched his stride. "I'm not used to much. You don't need to warn me." He glanced sideways at her. That same fractional shift in his expression. "No," he said after a moment. "I reckon I don't." The ride to Blackwood Ranch was an hour of mountain country that did not ask for your opinion of it. They sat on the wagon bench with a reasonable distance between them, and the horses moved at an easy pace up the road that wound into the high ground, and Ethan did not fill the silence with words. Amelia had expected that to feel cold. Instead, it felt almost like courtesy. She was the one who spoke first. "How long have you been out here alone?" He looked ahead. 6 years. That's a long time." "Reckon it is." "What happened 6 years ago?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "My father died," he said. "Ranch passed to me. Everyone else had already gone by then." She nodded. She did not push. She had learned a long time ago that people give you more if you don't grab. "The advertisement," she said instead. "The one for a wife. Was that your idea?" "It was," he said. "Why?" He shifted the reins slightly. "I'm 38 years old. I run a working ranch. I need someone who can help manage it. That's not a reason to be ashamed of." "I didn't say it was." He glanced at her again. "Most people think it is. Think a man ought to find a wife the regular way. Court her. All of that." "The regular way doesn't work for everyone," Amelia said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." Another silence. The road climbed. The mountains leaned in on either side, green and enormous, and indifferent to the small human conversation happening beneath them. "The letter they sent," Ethan said after a while. "The one describing you." She kept her eyes on the road. "What about it?" "They weren't kind about it." "No," she said. "They weren't. I noticed that." He paused. "I also noticed they were specific. People who are trying to embarrass someone usually just make things up. They were specific. The accounts, the household management, the practical experience." I was quiet for a beat. That told me they were telling the truth about the useful things, even if the rest of it was meant to be unkind. Amelia turned her head and looked at him properly for the first time. He was still looking at the road. "You read between the lines," she said. "I read what was there," he said. "A woman who could work, who was steady, who had managed things on her own for a long time." He finally glanced at her. That was all I needed to know. She looked back at the road. She did not say anything. But something inside her, Something that had been held very tightly for a very long time eased just slightly, like the first loosening of a knot. The ranch came into view around the last bend before the sun dropped behind the ridge. It was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something run down, perhaps a bachelor's property, that had gone to seed. Instead, Blackwood Ranch was solid. The main house was built from good timber 2 stories with a long porch and a yard that had seen regular work. There was a barn, large and well-maintained. Fencing that was in good repair. A kitchen garden at the side of the house that was slightly overgrown, but clearly someone's intention. The horses in the lower pasture were the most impressive things, 6 of them. Strong and well-fed with the kind of particular beauty that comes from being cared for properly. "They're yours," she said. "The ranch runs primarily on the horses. I breed them and sell to ranches across the territory." He pulled the wagon to a stop at the front of the house. "It's steady work, but the books have gotten complicated." "Complicated how?" He climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side. He reached up to take her bag. She climbed down herself, and he did not object to that. "I had a ranch hand named Cale Drummond," he said as they walked toward the porch. "He managed the accounts for 3 years. He left last winter. Since then, I've been handling it myself, which I'm not suited for." He pushed open the front door. "I'm a horseman, not an accounts man." "I'm an accounts woman," she said. He held the door for her. "I know," he said. "That's why I wrote back." Inside the house was clean, in the way that a solitary man cleans, which is to say, functional. Nothing was dirty exactly, but nothing had warmth to it either. The furniture was good and heavy and practical. There were no curtains on the windows. No photographs on the walls. No small evidence of anyone having ever lived here for pleasure rather than necessity. She stood in the kitchen doorway. He set her bag at the foot of the stairs. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "First on the left. It has a window." He moved toward the kitchen. "I'll warm the food." She did not go upstairs. She followed him into the kitchen instead. "Show me where you keep the accounts," she said. He turned around. He looked at her for a moment, that considering look again, and then he crossed to the far side of the kitchen and opened a drawer and produced a battered ledger book. He set it on the table. She sat down and opened it. He stood on the other side of the table watching. She turned pages. She did not speak. The ledger was a mess, not because the numbers were wrong, but because the system was inconsistent. Different columns from month to month. Records that started and then stopped. The handwriting changed partway through in a way that suggested a different person had taken over at some point and then abandoned the task. She traced a row with her finger. "This column," she said. "What does it track?" "Feed costs," he said. "Mostly." "Mostly." He came around the table to look over her shoulder. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, not uncomfortable, just present. Cale used the same column for different things sometimes, when he was moving fast. "It makes it impossible to see where the money is actually going," she said. "I know, that's the problem." She turned 2 more pages. Then she stopped. "Ethan?" "Yeah." She pointed to a series of entries near the bottom of a page from the previous October. "These amounts. The ones listed as miscellaneous supply." He leaned closer. "What about them?" "They're inconsistent with anything else in the book. The scale is wrong. One entry is $37 for supplies in October, when the next largest supply purchase in the entire previous year was 11. She looked up at him. He was closer than she'd realized. "What did Cale buy in October?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "He said it was feed," he said, "for the winter store." "Did you see it delivered?" A long pause. "I was up in the north pasture all of October," he said slowly. "Fence work." She looked back at the ledger. "I'll need to go through all of this," she said. "From the beginning." He was very still behind her. "Amelia," he said, "it'll take a few days." "Amelia." His voice was quiet. "What are you seeing?" She turned to look at him again. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm going to find out." He held her gaze. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Then let's start tonight, he said. She worked until the lamp oil ran low. Ethan sat across from her for most of it, answering her questions when she asked them and staying quiet when she was moving through numbers. He brought her a plate of food at some point, beans and cornbread, simple and warm, and she ate without stopping her work, which he seemed to find neither strange nor rude. When she finally sat back and pressed her hands flat on the table, he looked at her. "Well," he said, "I need one more day to be certain," she said. "But the pattern is clear enough that I can say this much now." She looked directly at him. Cale Drummond was not just careless with the accounts, he was using the accounts to cover something. Ethan did not flinch, but something in his face hardened. "How much?" he said. "I need to finish," she said. "But if I'm reading this correctly, quite a bit. And I don't think last winter was the first time." A long silence settled over the kitchen. Then Ethan said very quietly, "He was the only person I trusted with this ranch." She did not rush to fill that silence. She sat with it. "He had access," she said finally. "Access and time and a record that nobody was cross-checking." She met his eyes. "That's not your fault." He looked at her. He did not argue with her, which she had not expected. He did not thank her either, but she had not expected that either. He stood up from the table. He went to the window. He stood there for a while with his back to her, looking out at the dark. "I came out here," he said finally, "after my father died. I didn't want to be anywhere people knew me. Didn't want their questions or their sympathy or their stories about my father when he was young." He paused. "I built this place up from almost nothing. Just me and the horses and the land. And I trusted one man to help me manage it. And he took advantage of that trust," she said. "He did." He turned around. He looked at her across the width of the kitchen. "You've been here less than 8 hours." "Yes." "And you found something I missed for 3 years." She folded her hands on the table. "You weren't looking for it," she said. "You trusted him. That's different from being blind." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why did you come?" The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. She thought about Dorothea and the letter, Ruth's laughter, the Easter photograph, the platform at Clover Creek Station, and the decision she had made at 2 o'clock in the morning in a room that had never felt like hers. "Because I had nothing to lose," she said. "And because if there was even a chance that somewhere there was a place I could be useful, actually useful, not just tolerated, I wasn't going to pass it up because I was afraid." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You're useful." It was not a declaration. It was not poetic. It was a man who said what he meant and nothing else. But Amelia Parker, who had spent 16 years in a house where no one said anything, that was meant felt it land in her chest like something solid. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. He crossed to the doorway. "Get some sleep," he said. "I start early." "So do I," she said. He paused at the door. Something crossed his face there and gone too fast to name. Then he walked out. She sat alone in the kitchen for another moment, with the lamp burning low and the ledger open in front of her and the mountains dark outside the window. She thought, "I don't know what this is. I don't know what this place will be." But for the first time in longer than she could easily measure, she was somewhere she had chosen. And nobody had sent her back yet. She was up before the sun, not because Ethan had told her to be, though he had said he started early, but because she had not slept much, and when she could not sleep, she worked, and there was more than enough work waiting for her in that ledger downstairs. She dressed in the dark. She took the ledger from the kitchen table where she had left it. She lit the lamp. She made coffee on the stove because she had found the tin of grounds the night before, and because she had learned long ago that thinking clearly required something warm to hold on to. Then she sat down and opened the book to the page she had marked with a strip of cloth torn from the hem of her old petticoat, and she went back to work. By the time the light changed outside the kitchen window, that first gray suggestion of morning that precedes the actual sun, by about half an hour, she had found 3 more instances of the same pattern. Different months, different amounts, but the same signature move and entry listed as miscellaneous, recorded in a different hand from the surrounding pages, always when the numbers in the neighboring columns were particularly busy. The kind of busy that a man who was not an accounts man would not pause to examine. She was still sitting there when Ethan came downstairs. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He was already dressed, work clothes, boots, the leather vest, and he had clearly expected the kitchen to be empty because he stopped with his hand on the doorframe and looked at her with the particular expression of a man encountering something he had not prepared himself for. "You're up," he said. "Coffee's on," she said without looking up from the ledger. A pause. He came into the kitchen. She heard him pour a cup. He stood for a moment, and she could feel him looking at what she was doing, and then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You worked through the night," he said. "Not all of it." She turned a page. "Ethan, I need to ask you something directly." "Ask it." "Cale Drummond. Did he ever borrow money from you personally?" A silence. "Once," Ethan said. "2 summers ago. Said his mother was sick, needed to get to Denver." "Did she?" "He went to Denver for a week, came back without much explanation." She wrote a number in her own notebook. "Did he pay you back?" "He said he would. Took it out of his wages slowly. I didn't track it closely." She looked up at him then. He was watching her with that careful, steady look that she was beginning to understand was simply his baseline expression, not coldness, but concentration. The way a man looks when he is listening to something he does not want to misunderstand. "The amount he told you he needed," she said. "How much was it?" $40. She turned her notebook so he could see the number she had just written. 63. "That's what I found recorded against his name in the wages column for that period," she said. 40 withdrawn, and then if I'm reading this correctly, another 23 absorbed into a supply line that doesn't match any delivery I've found a record of." Ethan looked at the number. He set his coffee cup down. "He stole from me," he said, not a question. "I believe so," she said. "But I'm not finished yet." "How much total?" "I need 1 more day." "Amelia." His voice was steady but barely. "How much?" She held his gaze. "If the pattern holds from what I've already traced, somewhere between $200 and $250. Over 3 years." The kitchen went absolutely quiet. $250 in 1884. Wyoming was not a small sum. It was horses. It was fencing. It was the difference between a ranch that could weather a bad season and one that could not. Ethan stood up from the table. He crossed to the window. He stood with his back to her, both hands flat on the counter, his shoulders set in the way that men hold themselves when they are keeping something very controlled. She did not rush him. She went back to her numbers. After a long moment, he said, "He came to my father's funeral." She looked up. I was still facing the window. 6 years ago, when my father died, Cale was one of 3 people who came out to the ranch to pay respects. He stood at the graveside, and he shook my hand, and he said my father was a good man. A pause. "I hired him 6 months later because I thought I knew his character." Amelia set her pen down. "You did know his character," she said. "You knew who he was when he was being watched. You didn't know who he was when he thought he wasn't." Ethan turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" he said. "Not unkind, just direct." "No," she said. "It's supposed to be true." He looked at her for another moment. Then he exhaled a long, controlled breath, and he came back to the table, and he sat down, and he picked up his coffee, and he said, "What do you need from me to finish?" "Records from the past 3 winters," she said. "Any receipts you kept, any delivery records, anything in writing. I'll get them after the morning feed." She nodded and turned back to her work. He watched her for a moment longer, and then he said, "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," she said simply. "It's the work." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I mean." She knew what he meant. She kept her eyes on the page anyway. "Get your horses fed," she said. "I'll have more for you by noon." He got up. He went to the door. He paused. "Thank you," he said. She had thanked him the night before for saying she was useful. This was different. She felt the difference, but she did not examine it. Not yet. Go, she said. He went. She finished her analysis before noon as promised. The total she arrived at was $219 across 3 years. Not all of it was outright theft. Some of it was possible sloppiness, possible error. But the pattern was too consistent to be accident. Cale Drummond had been skimming from Blackwood Ranch in small, deliberate increments, always under amounts that would draw immediate attention, always in categories that were legitimately variable and therefore hard to question. He had been smart about it. Not brilliant, but patient. The kind of patient that relies on the certainty that nobody is looking closely. She reorganized the ledger. She made a clean copy of her findings in her own notebook with dates and amounts and the notation system she had developed in her aunt's household, clear, efficient, defensible. Then she closed both books and set them side by side on the table and made herself eat the last of the cornbread from the night before and thought about what came next. What came next walked in through the back door 40 minutes later, smelling of horses and summer work. Ethan set a box of papers on the table without a word, and then looked at the 2 books sitting side by side. "You're done," he said. "I'm done with the accounting," she said. "The next part isn't accounting." He sat down. He did not touch the books. He looked at her. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. Clear and direct the way she would have told anyone who needed the information in order to make a decision. She did not soften it, and she did not dramatize it. She gave him numbers and dates and a precise description of the methodology Drummond had used, and she told him that in her estimation, the evidence was sufficient to bring to a territorial court or a marshal's office if he chose to pursue it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "He's not here anymore," he said finally. "No, but he could be found, if you wanted to pursue it." "Or he could be not found," Ethan said, "and I could start over with a clean set of books." She watched him. "That's also a choice. What would you do?" She had not expected that question. She looked at her notebook. She thought about it honestly for a moment. "I would want to know that he couldn't do it to someone else," she said. "That's what would bother me. Not the money. The idea of him taking the same patience to the next man who trusted him." Ethan said nothing. "But it's your she said. "Your call." He was quiet for another beat. Then, "I'll talk to the marshal in town. Don't know what'll come of it, but I'll talk to him." He looked at her. "Can I use your records?" "That's why I made the clean copy," she said. He pulled the notebook toward him. He looked at the first page. Then he set it down again. He ran one hand across his jaw in a gesture that she was beginning to recognize as his version of composing himself. "I need to say something," he said. She waited. "I brought you out here for one reason," he said. "And in less than 24 hours, you've already done something I should have caught 3 years ago." He looked directly at her. "I don't know what you were expecting when you agreed to come, but I want you to know that whatever you expected, I intend to do better than that." She held his gaze. "Meaning, what exactly?" He did not look away. "Meaning, you're not a hired hand, and you're not a charity case, and you're not here because your family needed rid of you." A pause. "You're here because I asked for someone capable, and they sent me someone capable, even if they did it by accident." The precision of that, even if they did it by accident, almost made her smile. She caught it and held it back. "All right," she said. "All right. That's all I needed to hear," she said. "Now let me look at those papers you brought in." He stared at her for a moment. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Something she had seen twice now. That fractional movement that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. He slid the box of papers toward her. She went to work. By the end of the second day, the people of Calder Ridge had noticed her. It was not a large town. Word moved the way it moves in small places, not announced, but absorbed the way weather is absorbed before anyone speaks of it. Someone at the general store mentioned that Blackwood had a woman up at the ranch. Someone else had seen the wagon on the road. By the time Ethan rode into town that afternoon to speak with the marshal, the fact of Amelia Parker's existence in Calder Ridge had already been discussed, assessed, and formed into opinion. She found out the next morning when she walked with Ethan to the general store to collect a supply order. The man behind the counter was named Ferris. He was in his 50s, heavy-set with the particular confidence of a man who considers himself the informal historian of a small community. He looked at Amelia the way she had been looked at all her life, that quick, comprehensive, dismissive survey, and then he looked at Ethan. "This the woman from Missouri," he said. "This is Amelia Parker," Ethan said. His voice was entirely neutral. Ferris looked at her again. "Mail-order bride." "Ranch manager," Amelia said. Ferris blinked. He had clearly not expected her to speak. Men like Ferris rarely expected women like Amelia to speak. "Ranch manager," he repeated. "That's correct," she said. "I'm working the accounts and the household management. Is there a problem with that?" Ferris looked at Ethan again, as if waiting for him to correct her or apologize for her. Ethan said nothing. He simply stood there with his arms folded and waited. Ferris cleared his throat. "No problem at all," he said, and went to get their order. Walking back to the wagon, Ethan did not say anything for a full minute. Then, "Thank you." "For what?" she said. "For not letting him talk around you like you weren't there." "I've had enough of that to last a lifetime," she said. "I stopped allowing it." He glanced at her sideways. "When did you stop?" She thought about it. "Yesterday morning," she said, "when I sat down at your kitchen table." He was quiet for a moment. "Good timing," he said. She almost smiled again. This time she let herself. Just barely. What she had not anticipated was the woman. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She came to the ranch on the afternoon of the third day, drove herself up the mountain road in a small buggy, with the confidence of a woman accustomed to going where she wanted without explanation. She was perhaps 45, attractive in a composed and self-conscious way, and she walked up the porch steps and knocked without hesitation. Amelia opened the door because Ethan was in the barn. Eleanor Voss looked her up and down with a thoroughness that was almost impressive. "You must be the woman Ethan sent for," she said. "I'm Amelia Parker," Amelia said. "Can I help you?" "I'm Eleanor Voss. My husband and I have the Voss Ranch 3 miles east. We've known Ethan for years." She paused. "May I come in?" Amelia stepped back and let her in. Eleanor moved through the entry hall with the familiarity of someone who had been in this house before and frequently. She went to the parlor and sat down without being invited, and she looked around the room with an expression that Amelia could not quite categorize assessment. Yes, but something else beneath it. "He's improved the place," Eleanor said, "since I was here last winter." "The parlor," Amelia said. "Everything." Eleanor looked at her. "He doesn't usually let it look this lived in." "I've only been here 3 days." "I know." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "That's what I wanted to talk about." Amelia sat down across from her. She waited. "I want you to understand," Eleanor said, "that Ethan Blackwood is a good man. He is one of the best men I have ever known. He has lived out here alone for 6 years, and he has kept this ranch going entirely on his own, and he has done it without asking anyone for anything." She paused. "He is not the kind of man who trusts easily." "I'm aware of that," Amelia said. "Is that so?" Eleanor looked at her carefully. "He trusted Cale Drummond." "Yes, I warned him about Drummond." Eleanor's voice was level. 3 times. Over 3 years. Ethan didn't hear it. Amelia said nothing. "And now you've been here 3 days," Eleanor said, "and apparently you found something in those accounts that Ethan missed for 3 years." Her eyes were very direct. "How?" "I looked," Amelia said, "carefully, with no prior attachment to the person who kept them." Eleanor considered that. "I'm not here to be unkind," Eleanor said finally. "I want you to understand that. I care about what happens to Ethan, and I want to make sure—" She paused. "I want to make sure whoever comes into this man's life understands what they're working with. He doesn't show you what he's carrying, he just carries it." "I know," Amelia said quietly. Eleanor looked at her again, longer this time, and differently. "You've only been here 3 days," she said again. "I know what I've seen," Amelia said. "And I'm not here to take anything from him. I'm here because I was asked to come, and because there was work to do, and because this is the first place I've been in a very long time where my presence seems to be considered something other than a problem to manage." A long silence. Eleanor unfolded her hands. She looked at the room. Then she looked back at Amelia. "Well," she said, "you're not what I expected." "No," Amelia said. "I'm not." Eleanor stood. She smoothed her skirt. She went to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back. "The accounts," she said. "The problem with Drummond. Is it bad?" "It was. I've cleaned up the books. If Ethan pursues it through the marshal's office, there may be some recovery." "Good." Eleanor nodded once. "That's good." She paused. "Come to Sunday supper. My husband will want to meet you. And it'll be better for you in town if people see you're known to us." Amelia looked at her. "Why would you do that?" Eleanor's expression was not quite a smile, but it was something adjacent to warmth. "Because Ethan hasn't had anyone in that house worth talking about in 6 years," she said. "And something tells me you might last longer than a month." She left before Amelia could respond. Ethan came in from the barn 20 minutes later, and he found Amelia standing in the kitchen with a look on her face that he had not seen yet, not troubled exactly, but working something through. "Eleanor Voss was here," Amelia said. He stopped in the doorway. "I saw her buggy on the road. I didn't know she'd come up. She wanted to assess me." "Did she?" "She's protective of you," Amelia said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the pot on the stove, which had nothing to do with the conversation. "She warned you about Drummond, and you didn't hear it." Ethan came into the kitchen. He poured himself water from the pitcher. He drank half of it before he spoke. "Eleanor's been married to the same good man for 20 years, he said. "She's got strong instincts about character. She was right about Drummond." He set down the glass. "I was wrong." "She invited me to Sunday supper." He looked at her. "Did she?" "She said it would be better for me in town if people see I'm known to the Voss family." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She's right about that too," he said. "Small place. People decide what they think about you fast." "What do they think about you?" she said. He considered the question more seriously than most men would. "Solitary," he said. "Some people respect it. Some people think it's strange." He paused. "They'll have opinions about you being here." "They already do," she said. "I spoke to Ferris." "I heard about that," he said. She turned to look at him. "You heard about it already." "Ferris mentioned it to the blacksmith, who mentioned it to the liveryman, who mentioned it to the woman who does the laundry for the boarding house." He picked up his glass again. "She mentioned it to me when I was at the marshal's office this afternoon." Amelia stared at him. Then she said, "What did she say?" "She said Ethan Blackwood's new woman doesn't take any foolishness from Ferris, and she hoped that was true because Ferris had been needing someone to not take his foolishness for approximately 20 years. A beat of silence. Then Amelia laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in, she could not have said how long. Not a polite laugh, not a carefully managed smile, but a genuine laugh that came from somewhere she had not expected it to come from, sudden and unguarded. Ethan watched her. When it settled, she looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the careful assessment, not the controlled steadiness, but something open and slightly startled. Like a man who had seen something he was not expecting and had not yet decided what to do about it. "I'm glad it's amusing," he said, and his voice was dry but not unkind. "I'm sorry," she said, still catching her breath. "It's been a long few days." "It has," he said. She straightened. She reached for the pot on the stove. "I started a stew," she said. "There are potatoes from the garden." "You went to the garden." "I weeded it while I was thinking," she said. "It was overgrown." He looked at her. "You weeded my garden while you were thinking about accounting fraud." "I work better when my hands are moving," she said. I was quiet for a moment. And then for the first time since she had arrived, he laughed too. Short and low, barely more than an exhale, but real. She filed that away. She didn't know why. She just did. The marshal's name was Pruitt, and he arrived at Blackwood Ranch on Friday morning with the energy of a man who would have preferred to have been somewhere else. He was a compact, precise man in his early 50s with a marshal's star that he wore like it cost him something, and he sat at Ethan's kitchen table with Amelia's clean copy of the accounts in front of him, and he went through it with the deliberate patience of a man who had been shown too many things that turned out to be nothing. By the third page, he had stopped turning pages with that skeptical carefulness. By the sixth, he was reading with both hands flat on the table. When he finished, he looked up at Amelia. "You prepared this," he said. "I did," she said. "Where'd you learn to keep accounts like this?" "Practice," she said. He looked at Ethan. "You had 3 years of this man's records, and you didn't catch it." "No," Ethan said evenly. "I didn't. And she found it in 2 days." "She found the pattern in 1 day," Ethan said. "She spent the second day making the documentation clear enough that someone else could follow it." He paused. "Someone like you." Pruitt looked at the documentation again. Then he looked at Amelia. "You got any idea where Drummond went?" he said. "I don't know the man," she said. "I only know what he left behind in those books." "There's enough here to justify looking for him," Pruitt said. He folded the documentation carefully. "I'm going to have to take this." "That's why I made it," she said. He stood. He tucked the papers under his arm. He looked at Ethan again. "You always had good sense about horses," Pruitt said with the particular tone of a man who is saying one thing and meaning another. "Seems you're developing it in other areas too." He tipped his hat and left. Amelia sat at the kitchen table and breathed slowly. She had not realized how much tension she had been holding until Pruitt walked out with those papers, and she felt it leave her shoulders all at once. Ethan stood across the room watching her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. I wanted him to take it seriously." "He did. I know." She looked at her hands. "I've given accounts to men before who didn't." She paused. "My uncle's solicitor when I pointed out a discrepancy in the estate records after my uncle died. He thanked me very politely and then told the judge that he'd found the error himself." Ethan was still. "And," he said. "And nothing," she said. "I had no standing, no name, no one to speak for me." She looked up. "He got the credit. I went back to mending my cousin's dresses." A long silence. "That won't happen here," Ethan said. She looked at him. "If there's a proceeding," he said, "I'll make sure Pruitt knows who found it and how. I'll say it in front of whoever needs to hear it." His jaw was set. "You did the work. That'll be known." She studied his face. She was trying to determine if this was a courtesy or a promise. The steadiness in his expression told her it was neither. It was simply what he considered basic. "All right," she said. "You keep saying that," he said. "Because I keep meaning it," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. There and gone. "Supper's going to need another hour," she said, and reached for the pot. That evening after supper, Ethan went out to the barn for the last check of the night, and Amelia sat on the porch in the summer dark and listened to the mountains. There was no silence, quite like mountain silence. It was not empty. It was full of things that city silence was not: wind in the high grass, the particular call of birds. She did not yet know the names of the occasional sound from the barn that meant the horses were moving. But underneath all of that was a quality she had not experienced before. A settled, ancient quality. The mountains did not care what had happened at the kitchen table today. They did not care that $219 had been stolen, or that a man named Drummond had used someone's trust against him, or that a woman from Missouri had found it all in a battered ledger in less time than anyone had credited her capable of. The mountains were simply there, immovable, and in their indifference they were strangely kind. She was still sitting there when Ethan came back from the barn. He stopped when he saw her. "Didn't know you were still up," he said. "I was thinking," she said. He leaned against the porch railing, not sitting, just settling, and looked out in the same direction she had been looking. "What about?" he said. She thought about how to answer that honestly. "About what it feels like to be somewhere that didn't expect you," she said. "And to still be here." He was quiet for a moment. "Does it feel different?" he said. "Than what you're used to?" "Very," she said. "Good different or bad different?" She looked up at the sky. The stars were extraordinary out here, more of them than she had known existed when she was in Missouri, crowded out by settlement and habit. "Good," she said. "Strange and good." He turned to look at her. The lamplight from inside the house came through the window at an angle and caught the edge of his face, and she noticed again how tired he looked. Not sleepy tired, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from carrying something alone for too long. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Ask it." "You said you trusted Drummond because he came to your father's funeral," she said. "That you thought you knew his character." "Yes." "What was your father like?" He looked at her for a moment. She thought he might deflect. He was a man who deflected by staying quiet, and she had learned to recognize the shape of it. But he didn't. "He was the kind of man," Ethan said slowly, "who remembered the name of every horse he'd ever owned. Every one. Could tell you the year he bought them, what they were good at, what their faults were." He paused. "He said a man who takes time to know the thing in his care is a man worth knowing." She was quiet. "How was hard?" Ethan said. "Not cruel. Just the mountains make you hard in certain ways if you let them, if you don't fight it." A pause. "He didn't fight it as much as he should have, maybe. But he was fair, and he was honest, and when he was in a room you knew it." "You miss him," she said. "Every day," he said, simply. She did not rush to fill that with comfort. She just let it be what it was. After a while he said, "You lost your parents young." "Yes," she said. "Who looked after you?" "My aunt, my uncle." She kept her voice level. "They weren't unkind, they were just not interested. I was a responsibility. Something to be managed until I became someone else's responsibility." She paused. "I was never someone's choice." He turned his head and looked at her. "I chose you," he said. "Or I chose the letter that described you, which was the same thing as it turned out." Something happened in her chest. She did not name it. "That's true," she said very carefully. "It's more than a lot of people get," he said. She looked at the mountains. "It is," she agreed. They sat in the summer dark for another few minutes, not talking, not needing to, while the mountains stood over them with their ancient indifference, and the horses moved quietly in the barn, and somewhere in the high dark above the ridge, something, a hawk maybe, or an owl, called once, and then was gone. Ethan straightened up. "Early morning," he said. "I know," she said. He went inside. She stayed for another 5 minutes just breathing. Then she followed him in. She went upstairs to her room, the one with the window, and she looked out at the dark and the stars, and she thought about what he had said. "I chose you." She thought, nobody has ever said that to me before, not even close. She thought, I do not know what this becomes. I do not know if it becomes anything. But she knew something else just as clearly. She was not going back. Not because she had nowhere else to go. She had had nowhere else to go her whole life, and it had never stopped people from sending her away. She was not going back because for the first time in memory, staying felt like a decision she was making for herself. She lay down on the narrow bed in the room with the window. She did not mend anyone's dress. She did not go over numbers in her head. She did not rehearse what she might say tomorrow to someone who had already decided not to hear her. She closed her eyes. Outside, the mountains held their long, patient silence. And in the kitchen below, she heard the sound of Ethan banking the fire for the night, careful, deliberate, the way he did everything, and she realized she had already memorized that sound without meaning to. She was asleep before she had time to decide what that meant. The Sunday supper at the Voss Ranch changed things. Not dramatically. Not in the way that things change in stories where one moment reshapes everything that follows. It changed the way the slow loosening of a long-held knot changes things gradually, and then all at once and only obvious in retrospect. Eleanor Voss set a table. The way some women build an argument with intention and precision, and the quiet confidence of someone who has done this enough times to know exactly what she is doing. Her husband Robert was a broad, red-faced man with a handshake that meant business, and eyes that were kinder than his handshake suggested. He shook Amelia's hand the way he would have shaken a man's firmly, without the brief hesitation that most men inserted when they realized the hand they were shaking belonged to a woman who was going to be doing something other than pouring coffee. "Ethan says you've already been into the accounts," Robert said before they had even sat down. "I have," she said. "And you found what Eleanor's been saying for 3 years." "Robert," Eleanor said. "It's a fair thing to say," he said without apology. He looked at Amelia with the directness of a man who respected the same quality in others. "We told him Drummond was skimming. He didn't believe us, or he didn't want to." He glanced at Ethan. "No offense." "None taken," Ethan said with the flatness of a man who has decided to absorb a truth rather than argue with it. "The marshal's looking into it," Amelia said. "The documentation is clear." "Good." Robert sat down and reached for the bread. "You staying on then, after it's resolved?" The question landed on the table like something that had been hovering over the whole meal, waiting for someone to put it down. Ethan was very still across from her. Amelia looked at Robert Voss calmly. "That depends on whether I'm still needed," she said. "You're needed," Ethan said. Not elaborated, not softened, just stated the way he stated things that he considered factual. Robert looked between them. He reached for the butter. "Good," he said again. "Then that's settled." Eleanor met Amelia's eyes across the table. Something passed between them. Woman to woman, quick and complete. And Eleanor reached for the gravy and the conversation moved on, and Amelia ate her supper and felt for the first time in recent memory, like a person at a table rather than a person beside one. It was on the ride home that Ethan said the thing she had not expected. They were 20 minutes out from the Voss ranch, the wagon moving at an easy pace through the long summer evening, when he said without preamble, "I should have listened to Eleanor." She looked at him. "About Drummond," he said. "She told me 3 years ago. Robert told me twice. I heard it and I decided they were wrong because I needed them to be wrong." He kept his eyes on the road. "I needed someone I could trust on that ranch, and I decided Drummond was that person before I had any real evidence he was." "That's a human thing to do," she said. "It cost the ranch $219. "Yes," she said. She did not pretend otherwise. "I don't do that," he said. "I don't decide what I need and then build the evidence to match it. That's not how I run things." She looked at his profile in the evening light. "You do it less than most people," she said. "That's not the same as never." He was quiet. "What made you trust him in the first place?" she said. "How was good with the horses?" Ethan said. "Better than good. He had the instinct for it, knew when an animal was off, knew how to approach a nervous mare, knew which ones needed more time and which ones needed more firm handling." A pause. "I thought a man who understood horses understood something real." "He probably did," she said. "That part wasn't a performance." "No," he said. "I don't think it was." "He was 2 things at once," she said. "That's harder to see than one clean thing." Ethan looked at her sideways. "You're being generous to him." "I'm being accurate," she said. "Generous would be forgiving him. I'm not doing that. I just think it's important to understand how a man earns trust before you understand how he misuses it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Where'd you learn to think like that?" "My mother," she said. And then, because it surprised her that she'd said it, she said it again quietly. "My mother. She used to say, understand a thing before you judge it. Judging without understanding is just fear wearing a better coat." Ethan looked ahead at the road. "She sounds like she was something," he said. "She was," Amelia said. "She really was." They rode the rest of the way in the kind of silence that does not need filling. The letter arrived 9 days after Pruitt took the documentation. Amelia was in the kitchen working on a revised supply schedule. She had identified 3 areas where the ranch was consistently overpaying on materials, a problem fixable by shifting when and from where they ordered. When she heard Ethan's boots on the porch and then heard him stop, she looked up. He came in with an envelope in his hand and a look on his face that she had not seen before. Not the controlled steadiness. Something harder than that. something that was working to stay controlled and finding it more difficult than usual. Drummond wrote, he said. She set down her pen. He crossed to the table and set the envelope down in front of her. He did not sit. She looked at the envelope. She did not open it. It was not her letter to open. He wrote to me, she said. He wrote to both of us. Ethan pulled a chair and sat down with the heaviness of a man lowering something he has been carrying too long. There are 2 pages, one addressed to me, one to Amelia Parker of Blackwood Ranch. He said her name and address as they appeared on the page, formal and strange. She looked at him. You read it. Mine, he said. Not yours. She reached for the envelope. She separated the 2 sheets carefully and set his aside. She unfolded hers. It was not long. Cale Drummond wrote in a hand she recognized from the accounts. Not as neat as she would have liked, but deliberate. A man who took his time with letters. He wrote Miss Parker. I am told you are the one who found it. I expected to be found eventually. I did not expect to be found by someone who had only just arrived. I have no defense to make for what I did. I know what I did, but I want you to know one thing, for whatever it is worth. Ethan Blackwood is an honest man. He deserved better than me. I am glad someone is there who can see that. She read it twice. She set it down. She looked at Ethan. What did yours say? He picked up his own page. He read it aloud in the flat voice of a man performing a task. Ethan. I know you know. I knew you'd find it eventually. I told myself for 3 years it wasn't as bad as it was. That was a lie I told myself, because I am not brave enough to be honest. What I did to you is not forgivable. I know that. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking you to know that the man you hired, the one who could work your horses and keep your ranch and stand at your father's grave, that man was real too. I don't know how both of those things can be true, but they are. I am sorry. Cale. Silence. Amelia looked at the 2 pages on the table between them. He's not coming back, she said. No. And he's not going to be easy to find. Probably not. She thought for a moment. Pruitt should still know about this letter. It's an admission. Yes. She folded her page carefully. She looked at Ethan. His jaw was working that small tense movement she now knew meant he was processing something that had reached him in a way he had not prepared for. He said the man who worked your horses was real, she said. I think that's true. He looked at her. I think Cale Drummond was a man who was capable of real loyalty, she said, and who chose not to extend it to you because somewhere along the way he decided his own need was bigger than your trust. That's not a mystery. That's just a failure. A choice made badly over and over until it became a pattern. She paused. It doesn't mean the good parts weren't real. It means he chose to undo them. Ethan looked at his page. I keep coming back to the funeral, he said. I know. A man doesn't come to your father's funeral out of calculation, he said. That's not something you manufacture. No, she said. I don't think he manufactured it. So how do you hold both of those things? She was quiet for a moment, honest with herself before she answered. I don't know if you ever hold them comfortably, she said. I think you just carry them, the way you carry most of the hard things. They don't resolve. They just become part of what you know about how complicated a person can be. He looked at her across the table. You're 27 years old, he said. Yes. How do you know this much? She picked up her pen. I've had a lot of time to think, she said. Not a lot else to do with it. He picked up his letter. He folded it. He put it in his vest pocket over his heart without appearing to notice he'd done it. She noticed. She went back to the supply schedule. The twist came the following Tuesday, and it came from a direction she had not seen. She was at the general store alone, for the first time. Ethan having ridden out to the north pasture before she'd even had coffee when Ferris called her to the counter with the particular tone of a man who has been waiting to say something and has finally run out of patience for waiting. She came to the counter. He set an envelope on it, not handed to her set with deliberate flatness like a card played in a game. This came for you, he said. Addressed to Blackwood Ranch, but came through the general post. He paused. From Clover Creek, Missouri. She looked at the handwriting on the envelope. Dorothea. She picked it up. She did not open it there in front of Ferris, which was clearly what he had been hoping for. "Thank you," she said, and put it in her coat pocket. She heard him say something to the man beside him as she walked out. She did not catch the words, but she caught the tone, and the tone was the same one she had been hearing all her life. The tone that said that one. "There's something off about that one. Something not right, you watch and see." She walked to the wagon. She sat in the seat. She opened the letter. It was 3 paragraphs. Dorothea wrote the way she talked quickly, with the assumption that her meaning would be taken as intended. The first paragraph established that the family was, well, the summer had been warm, and the festival had been lovely. A paragraph that existed only to pretend the letter was something other than what it was. The second paragraph asked carefully lightly, as though just wondering how things were going in Wyoming, whether the ranch was as described, whether Amelia was finding it agreeable. The third paragraph was the one that mattered. "We have heard through the Post Network that you have made yourself useful there, that the rancher seems satisfied. We wanted you to know, and I hope you take this in the spirit, it's intended that we are glad it has worked out. Ruth says to say hello. Mother sends her love." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it back in her pocket. "Made yourself useful. The rancher seems satisfied." 11 words that told her exactly what Dorothea thought she was. Not a woman who had gone somewhere and built something. A function. A service that had against expectations performed adequately. She sat in the wagon for a long moment. Then she drove home. She was at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her when Ethan came in from the north pasture, earlier than she expected, with dust on his jacket and a look that shifted when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said before he had even taken off his hat. She looked up. She had not realized anything was showing. She pushed the letter across the table. He read it standing up. When he finished, he set it down. He looked at her. "Made yourself useful," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's what they think you are," he said. "Something that serves a purpose." "That is what they think," she said. Her voice was steady. "It is not what I am." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her. Not the one beside her, the one across where he could see her face clearly, and he sat down. "Right back," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "Right back to her." He was looking at her with the same level, deliberate attention. He gave everything he considered worth his full concentration. "Tell her whatever you want to tell her, but right back." "Why?" "Because you have something to say," he said. "And because you have been not saying it for a very long time, and I don't think it's serving you well." She looked at the letter. "I don't want to be angry in a letter," she said. "Then don't be angry," he said. "Say what's true." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached for her pen. She wrote the letter in 20 minutes. She did not draft it or revise it. She wrote it the way she had learned to write account entries, clear, factual, and precise, with nothing included that did not belong. She wrote Dorothea, "Thank you for your letter. I am glad the festival was pleasant and that everyone is well. As to Wyoming, the ranch is real, the work is considerable, and I am doing it well. Not well enough to be useful. Well enough to have corrected a 3-year accounting fraud, reorganized the ranch's supply costs, and been invited to Sunday supper by the most respected family in this county. I am not the rancher's convenience. I am his manager and his partner, and in time, I believe I will be a great deal more than that. I hope Clover Creek is treating you as well as Wyoming is treating me. Amelia." She folded it. She sealed it. She looked at Ethan. He had been watching her write. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. "Good," he said, and went to get water from the pitcher. She looked at the sealed envelope. She thought, "I have never written a letter like that in my life." She thought it felt like the truest thing I have ever put on paper. She put it in her coat to mail the next morning. 3 days later, Cale Drummond was found. Not by Pruitt's initiative, by accident, the way these things often happen. A marshal in a town called Sheridan, 2 days' ride north, had been alerted by the description that went out through the territorial network and had recognized a man matching it at the livery on a Tuesday afternoon and had simply walked up and confirmed the name. Drummond apparently had not run as far or as carefully as he might have. Pruitt came to the ranch with the news, and with something else, a request. He sat at the kitchen table, his hat in his hands, and he looked at Amelia with the expression of a man who is about to ask for something he is not entirely comfortable asking for. "There's going to be a hearing," he said. "Territorial Circuit Court. Judge Alderman comes through Calder Ridge every 3 months. Next session is in 2 weeks." "All right," she said. "Drummond's being brought back," Pruitt said. "He's cooperating. His attorney has indicated he may enter a plea which would simplify things. But there will still be a proceeding." He paused. "I'd like you to present the accounts." She looked at him. "Myself. The documentation is yours," he said. "I can present it, but you know it better than anyone, and in my experience, Judge Alderman asks questions. Detailed questions. And the person who can answer them is always the person who did the work." Ethan, who had been standing near the door, said, "She'll do it." Amelia looked at him. "If she's willing," he added, looking at her. "I'm willing," she said. She turned back to Pruitt. "What do I need to prepare?" The 2 weeks before the hearing were the most densely packed of Amelia's time on the ranch, and they were also somehow the most settled. She prepared the documentation for the hearing. She worked the ranch accounts. She managed the supply corrections she had identified and confirmed within 10 days that the ranch's monthly outlay had dropped by nearly 12%, simply by adjusting where and when they were ordering. She weeded the kitchen garden properly, not just in passing, but methodically, the way she did everything, until it looked like something that was being tended, rather than something that had been forgotten. She went to Eleanor Voss for 2 Sunday suppers, and found over the course of those evenings that Eleanor's initial assessment of her had shifted from something cautious to something warmer. Eleanor asked direct questions, and Amelia answered them directly, and Robert laughed at things she said, with the ease of a man who has recognized in someone a quality he admires, and the Voss table became the second place in Calder Ridge, where she felt provisionally and carefully like she might belong. The provisional part mattered. She was not naive about it. She had been places before where she had felt the first warmth of acceptance, and then discovered it had a condition attached that she had not seen coming. She was careful. She observed. She did not assume. But Ethan. Ethan was different from everything she was being careful about in a way she was having increasing difficulty explaining to herself. How was not demonstrative. He did not say things for the sake of saying them. He did not manage her emotions or frame situations to protect her from their edges. He was direct, and he was consistent, and he occupied a room the same way whether she was in it or not, which was to say with full presence and no performance. But there were things, small things that accumulated the way small things do quietly, until you look up one day and realize they have changed the shape of the room. He brought her coffee before she was fully awake, setting it on the table without a word, knowing she was already working even when she appeared to be just sitting. He asked her opinion on the horses not as courtesy, but genuinely wanting to know what she observed from a distance that he might miss from up close. He came in one evening to find her reading by the lamp, and instead of going upstairs, he sat in the chair across the room and read too. And they stayed like that for 2 hours without speaking. And it was the most comfortable 2 hours she had ever spent in anyone's company. He told her once in passing that she had changed the temperature of the house. She had not known what to do with that, so she had said nothing, and he had not repeated it, but she had not forgotten it either. She did not let herself name what was happening. She did not have the luxury of naming it and having it not be real. So she kept her head down, and she did the work, and she let the warmth accumulate in whatever unnamed way it was going to accumulate, and she waited to see what it became. The hearing arrived on a Thursday. Calder Ridge did not have a proper courthouse. Judge Alderman convened in the back room of the church, which was the largest indoor space available, and the town turned out for it with the appetite of people who did not get much entertainment and were not going to miss any that came their way. Amelia sat at the front table with Pruitt. Ethan sat one row behind her. She was aware of him in the specific way she had become aware of him over the past 2 weeks, not distracting but grounding, like a fixed point. Drummond was brought in by 2 men she didn't recognize. He looked smaller than she had expected, She had built him up in her mind from the accounts, from the deliberateness of the theft, the patience of it, and the man who sat across the room was just a man. Tired. Wearing the particular expression of someone who has stopped arguing with what they've done and is now simply waiting to find out what it costs. He looked at Ethan first. Ethan looked back at him for a long moment and then looked away. Drummond looked at Amelia. She held his gaze. He looked down. Judge Alderman was a thin man with the quality of an object that has been used precisely and maintained, carefully worn smooth in the right places, still sharp where it mattered. He opened the proceedings with efficiency and without ceremony, and got to the accounts within the first 10 minutes. "I'm told," he said, looking at Amelia over his spectacles, "that the documentation was prepared by you." "It was," she said. "You're not from here." "No, sir. Missouri originally." "And you've been on the Blackwood Ranch how long?" 3 weeks as of this morning." A murmur in the room. She had expected that. She did not respond to it. 3 weeks, Alderman said. He looked at the documentation in front of him. He looked back at her. "And in 3 weeks you identified and documented a pattern of financial fraud spanning 3 years." "Yes, sir." "Walk me through it," he said. "From the beginning." She walked him through it. She was precise, and she was clear, and she moved through the documentation at a pace that let him follow without losing the thread. And when he asked questions, which he did regularly, the detailed questions Pruitt had warned her about, she answered them without hesitation, because she knew the material. The way you know something you have genuinely understood rather than memorized. At the back of the room, she heard Ferris say something under his breath to the man beside him. She could not hear the words. She could hear the tone. She kept her eyes on Judge Alderman and kept talking. When she finished, Alderman looked at the documentation for a full minute without speaking. Then he looked at Drummond's attorney. "Does your client have a response to any of this accounting?" Drummond's attorney was a young man from the county seat who looked like he had been given this case at the last possible moment and had spent the journey here hoping for a miracle. "My client does not dispute the accounting, Your Honor." Alderman looked at Drummond directly. "Mr. Drummond, did you take money from Blackwood Ranch over the period described in this documentation?" Drummond looked up. He looked at the judge. He did not look at Ethan. "Yes," he said. His voice was flat and clear. "I did." The room erupted. Not into chaos, into the controlled, buzzing eruption of people absorbing something they had known was coming, but still needed a moment to absorb. Amelia sat still. Ethan put his hand on the back of her chair. Not on her shoulder. Not touching her. Just there. 2 inches behind her. Present. She felt it as clearly as if he had spoken. The hearing concluded within the hour. Drummond pleaded to the charge. The judge ordered restitution, the full $219 to be paid within 18 months from Drummond's wages. Under a work arrangement, the territorial court would supervise and levied an additional fine for the violation of trust, implicit in a worker-employer relationship governed by a formal agreement. It was not the harshest possible outcome for Drummond. It was not the softest. It was precise, and it was fair, and it was done. Alderman closed the proceedings. People stood. The room reshuffled itself into the informal arrangements of people who have witnessed something significant and need a few minutes to decide what to say about it. Amelia stayed in her chair for a moment. She was not overwhelmed. She was simply taking a breath. Ethan came around from behind her. He stood beside her. "That was something," he said. "It was straightforward," she said. "Not to most people in this room," he said. "They were watching you the whole time." She looked up at him. "I know." "Did it bother you?" She thought about it honestly. "It used to," she said. "Being watched and not being heard. Being assessed and then dismissed." She stood up. "Today they were watching and hearing. That's different." He looked at her. "It is different," he said. "You made it different." Before she could respond, Pruitt was at her elbow, with the particular energy of a man who has just had a professional success and is being gracious about it. He shook her hand. He thanked her. He said the documentation was the clearest he had seen in a territorial proceeding in several years, and that if she ever considered a career in legal record management, he would write a reference without hesitation. She thanked him. He moved on. Eleanor Voss appeared from somewhere to her left and squeezed her arm once firmly with the economy of a woman who communicates precisely what she means and nothing more. Robert Voss shook her hand the same way he always did, like she was a person of substance. And then the room thinned, and she was standing near the door with Ethan, and they walked out into the summer afternoon together. On the steps of the church, Ferris was standing with two other men. He looked at Amelia as she came out. He looked at Ethan. His expression was the expression of a man who has arrived at a position. He is not sure he wanted to arrive at it, but has arrived at it anyway, through the simple accumulation of evidence. He tipped his hat. Amelia nodded. Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. They walked to the wagon. They were halfway home before either of them spoke. It was Ethan. When Alderman asked you to walk him through the documentation, he said, "You didn't look at the papers." "I didn't need to," she said. "I know it. You know $219 of my stolen money better than I knew it." "Yes," she said. He was quiet. Then, Why take it on like that? You'd been there 3 days when you found it. You didn't owe me anything." She looked at the road ahead. "Because it was there to be found," she said. "Because no one had looked. Because a man was being wronged, and the evidence was sitting right there in a drawer, and all it needed was someone willing to sit down and look at it without deciding in advance what they were going to see." "That's not a complete answer," he said. She turned to look at him. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He looked at her. She looked at him. The wagon moved forward under the summer sky, the mountains leaning in on either side with their ancient patience, and she thought, there are things I have not said yet, things I am not sure I know how to say. Things that have been building in the space between us since the first morning in that kitchen, since the lamp oil ran low, since he said I chose you on a wagon bench in the evening light. She thought, I will say them. She thought, not yet. But soon. She turned back to the road. "I'll tell you the rest," she said, "when I know how to say it." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. And then carefully, with the deliberateness of a man who does nothing by accident, he moved on the wagon bench. Just slightly, just enough that his arm was against hers. Not around her, not grabbing, just present, contact. She did not pull away. She did not say anything. She let his warmth settle against her arm, and she looked at the mountain road ahead, and she thought, I am still here. I chose to stay. And something is coming that I cannot name yet, but I am not afraid of. That was new. She had been afraid of most things for most of her life. Not this. Not here. Not anymore. She told him the rest on a Saturday morning 3 days after the hearing. Not because she had planned it for Saturday. Not because she had rehearsed it or decided the moment was right. It happened because she walked into the barn to tell him that the feed delivery had come short by 40 pounds, and she found him sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands, and she stopped in the doorway, and she said nothing, and he looked up, and whatever was on his face in that unguarded moment, before he had time to arrange it back into the controlled steadiness. She knew cracked something open in her chest that she had been trying to keep closed. "What happened?" she said. He straightened. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the barn floor for a moment before he looked at her. "Nothing happened," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she said. He looked at her then, not with irritation, with something more complicated than that. "I got a letter this morning," he said, "from the Territorial Land Office." She came into the barn. She sat down on the hay bale across from him. "Tell me," she said. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded paper. He held it without opening it, turning it between his hands, the way a man handles something he is still deciding what to do with. "When my father died," he said, "he left the ranch to me. There was a deed. Clear title registered in the Territorial Office transferred in my name." He paused. Cale Drummond was present at the transfer. He witnessed the signature. He was one of 2 witnesses required. She felt something shift in her chest. "And the land office is saying there's a question about the transfer," he said. "That someone filed a challenge 6 months ago before I found out about the money before any of this. Someone filed the challenge claiming the deed transfer was improper." He looked up at her. "Drummond is listed as the complainant." The barn went very still. She looked at the letter in his hands. He filed a challenge against your deed, she said, while he was still working for you. 6 months ago, Ethan said. While he was still managing my accounts. While he was still coming in for supper sometimes. While I was still calling him by his first name. His jaw was tight. The letter says a hearing has been scheduled, Territorial Land Court, 2 months from now. On what grounds? She said. What is the challenge? He opened the letter. He read, the challenge asserts that the deed transfer executed at the time of Thomas Blackwood's death was witnessed under duress, that the primary beneficiary exerted undue influence over the deceased in the final weeks of his life, and that the rightful disposition of the Blackwood land holdings may be subject to review. He folded the letter again. Amelia sat very still. He's saying you coerced your dying father, she said. Yes. That's a lie. Yes, he said. It is. Can he prove it? No, Ethan said. Because it didn't happen. But he doesn't need to prove it to cost me time and money and... He stopped. He looked at his hands. My father built this land. He worked it for 30 years. He broke his back on it, and he loved it, and he left it to me because he trusted me to keep it going the way he would have wanted. His voice did not waver, but it was very quiet. I am not going to lose it to a lie told by a man I trusted. She looked at him. She thought about what he had said to her weeks ago. I came out here after my father died. I didn't want to be anywhere people knew me. I built this place up from almost nothing. She thought about the ledger and Drummond's careful patient theft and the letter he had written that said, I know what I did. She thought he knew what he was doing, and he did it anyway, and the money was only part of it. He knew this would happen, she said. Ethan looked at her. The deed challenge, she said. He filed it 6 months ago, before he left, before the money was discovered. He knew that when he left, when the theft was eventually found, he needed something to use, a counterweight. She looked at the letter. If you pursue him for the money, he threatens the deed. If you back off the money to protect the deed, he walks free, and the land office challenge just sits there costing you time and lawyers and uncertainty. She paused. He built himself a trapdoor. Ethan was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the fractional almost smile. Not the controlled steadiness. Something rawer than that. That's exactly what he did, he said. Then we have to close it, she said. Both sides at once. The restitution proceeding is already in motion. Pruitt has the documentation, the judge has ruled, Drummond has confessed. That part is done. What he's counting on is that the deed challenge feels separate. That you'll treat it as a different problem. She leaned forward. It's not a different problem. It's the same problem. And the documentation, I have the full account of his methods, his access, his history on this ranch. That documentation tells the story of a man who had both the means and the motive to manufacture a false claim. He stared at her. You think you can use the accounting records in the land hearing, he said. I think the pattern matters, she said. A man who spent 3 years stealing from you in small deliberate increments is the same man who filed a legal challenge against your deed 6 months ago. That's not a coincidence. That's a methodology. She paused. Judge Alderman has already seen the documentation. Pruitt has already testified to its accuracy. We go to the land hearing with the same records and the same evidence, and we show the judge there what kind of man Drummond is. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. He crossed to where she was sitting. He stood in front of her, and she looked up at him, and his face was doing something she could not fully name, something that had to do with being seen, and not being used to it, and not knowing what to do with it. Why? He said. Not aggressively, just genuinely, like a man asking a question he actually needs answered. Why what? She said. Why do you keep doing this? He said. You found the money. That was already more than I asked for. You prepared the documentation and presented it in court. That was more than I expected. And now? He stopped. He looked at his hands. You got here with 1 bag and $7 and a family that sent you as a joke. You had no obligation to do any of this. She looked at him steadily. You asked me why before, she said. And I told you part of it. Tell me the rest, he said. You said you would. She took a breath. I came here because I had nothing to lose, she said. That was true. But that's the reason I got on the train. It's not the reason I stayed. She paused. I stayed because you treated me like a person from the first moment. Not a charity, not a convenience, not a problem to be managed. She looked at him directly. You looked at a letter that described me as plain and ordinary and unremarkable, and you wrote back and said I sounded like exactly what you needed. And I don't think you know how. I don't think you understand what that was like for me to read. He did not look away. I think I have some idea, he said quietly. And then I got here, she said, and you handed me a broken ledger, and you sat across the table from me at midnight, and you answered every question I asked, without once suggesting I might be wrong or confused or overreaching. She paused. Do you know how rare that is? A man who just answers, who doesn't reframe the question or explain it back to you differently, or suggest you might want to check your math. You didn't need your math checked, he said. No, she said. I didn't. But most men would have checked it anyway. He was looking at her with that raw, unguarded expression still on his face, still not knowing what to do with it, still trying. She said, this ranch is yours. Your father built it, and you kept it going, and you did it honestly, and you deserve to keep it. And I am good at finding the truth in numbers, and I am going to use that to help you keep it, because that is what I'm here for. She paused. And because I do not want to leave. The barn was very quiet. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I don't want you to leave either. She heard it land. She felt it settle. She stood up. Then let's go write a letter to Pruitt, she said. And one to the Territorial Land Court. We have 2 months, and I intend to use all of them. He reached out and touched her hand. Not a grasp, not a hold. Just the lightest possible pressure fingers against the back of her hand for one moment present and deliberate. Then he stepped back. All right, he said. Let's go. Dorothea and Ruth arrived on a Wednesday. Amelia did not know they were coming. There had been no letter, or if there had been a letter, it had not arrived before they did, which was entirely possible, given the inconsistency of post between Missouri and Wyoming mountain country. She was in the kitchen working the supply ledger when she heard a wagon on the road. She looked up. She did not think anything of it. Wagons came up the road with some regularity, now more than they had in Ethan's solitary years, because the household had become a known entity in Calder Ridge, and known entities attracted traffic. But then she heard a voice she recognized, and everything in her went still. She stood up from the table. She walked to the front door. She opened it. Dorothea was climbing down from the wagon with the careful dignity of a woman who has been traveling for several days and is committed to not showing it. Ruth was already on the ground looking at the house with the expression of someone who had arrived expecting to find something other than what was in front of them. They were both dressed well, their town clothes the good ones, and they had luggage, which meant they had not come for an afternoon. Dorothea saw her in the doorway. Something crossed her face, too quick to catch entirely. Surprise, maybe, or the adjustment a person makes when they have been preparing to encounter something diminished and have found instead something that is not diminished at all. Amelia, she said. Dorothea, she said. Ruth. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands loose at her sides. I didn't know you were coming. We wrote, Ruth said, slightly defensive. The letter didn't arrive, Amelia said. Come in. She stepped back. She held the door. They came in. She watched them look at the house, the kitchen with the organized shelves, the parlor with the curtains. She had made 3 weeks ago from fabric. Robert Voss had brought from the county seat at Eleanor's direction the clean table, the order that had accumulated in the space. She watched them recalibrate. She brought them water. She put coffee on. She sat across from them at the kitchen table, and she waited. Dorothea was the one who spoke first. She was always the one who spoke first. It's very nice, she said, meaning the house, meaning all of it. Yes, Amelia said. It is. Ruth was looking around with the expression of a person doing arithmetic. You did all this? I manage the house, Amelia said. Ethan built it. Where is he? Dorothea said. North pasture, Amelia said. He'll be in before dark. A pause. Dorothea folded her hands on the table. We came, she said, because we wanted to see how you were. I'm well, Amelia said. You can see that. Yes. A pause. You look different. Do I? You look... Dorothea seemed to be searching for the word and finding only honest ones. Settled. You look settled. I am settled, Amelia said. Ruth said more quickly than she intended. Mother was worried. Amelia looked at her. Was she? She felt we all felt that perhaps we had acted in haste, sending you the way we did. Ruth was not comfortable with this. Ruth had never been comfortable with any version of accountability. But she was trying, and Amelia recognized the effort even if she did not intend to reward it beyond recognition. We thought if it hadn't worked out. It worked out, Amelia said. Clearly, Dorothea said. I can see that. She paused again. The letter you wrote. The one about the accounting fraud and the county family and... She stopped. It was not what we expected. No, Amelia said. I don't imagine it was. A long silence. Dorothea looked at her hands. Then she looked up, and for the first time in Amelia's memory, she looked like she was about to say something she had not prepared in advance. We sent you as a joke, she said. Yes, Amelia said. You did. That was wrong, Dorothea said. The kitchen was very quiet. Amelia looked at her cousin. She looked at the woman who had laughed in a sitting room and sent a bad photograph to a stranger, and expected the world to confirm what she already believed about the woman she was sending away. She thought about all the things she could say, all the things she had thought at 2 a.m. on a narrow bed in a small room. All the ways this moment could go if she let it go somewhere sharp. She said, I know it was. Dorothea nodded. Ruth looked at the table. I'm glad it worked out the way it did, Dorothea said. I am genuinely glad. Amelia studied her. She was looking for the angle the request underneath the apology the thing being positioned for. She was very good at finding those things. She did not find one. Thank you, she said. That means more than you might expect. The door opened. Ethan came in. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He took in the 2 women at the table. He looked at Amelia. She met his eyes. She gave a very small nod. He set his hat on the hook by the door. He came to the table. He pulled out the chair beside Amelia, beside her, not across, and he sat down. These are my cousins, Amelia said. Dorothea and Ruth, from Clover Creek. I figured, he said. He looked at Dorothea. He looked at Ruth. His expression was perfectly even. You're the ones who sent the letter. Dorothea said yes. And the photograph? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Not hostile. Not performing forgiveness either. Just present with it the way he was present with everything. You want to stay a few days, he said. Both women blinked. If there's room, Ruth said carefully. There's room, he said. He looked at Amelia. I'll get the other room set up after supper. Amelia looked at him. He was not doing this for the cousins. She knew that. He was doing it because she was looking at 2 women who had come a long way to say something difficult, and because he understood, without it being explained to him, that the option to receive that with something other than sharpness was worth making available. She thought this man who says the right thing by saying almost nothing. Thank you, she said to him. He got up to start the water for supper. The 3 days that followed were not comfortable. They were not meant to be comfortable. But they were honest in the way that things are honest when everyone in the room has decided tacitly to stop performing. Dorothea watched Amelia work. She watched her manage the kitchen and the accounts and the communication with Pruitt about the land court preparation. She watched Ethan defer to Amelia's judgment on the supply questions and the scheduling and the correspondence without any of the condescension or the patient correction that Dorothea had seen every man in Clover Creek apply to every woman who ventured an opinion. On the second evening, she said, "He listens to you." "Yes," Amelia said. "Really listens," Dorothea said. Yes. How did you? She stopped. I just told him things that were true, Amelia said. And he heard them. It was that simple, and that surprising. Dorothea was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think I told you for years that you were ordinary. You did, Amelia said. Not in words always, Dorothea said, but in everything else. She looked at the table. I think I was wrong about that. Amelia looked at her cousin. This woman who had laughed, who had chosen the worst photograph, who had written a letter designed to be an insult, who had come 2 days' travel through summer country to sit in Amelia's kitchen and say something she had not been able to say for 27 years. You were wrong, Amelia said, simply, not cruelly, just factually. I know, Dorothea said. I'm sorry for it. Amelia let that sit for a moment. Then she poured her cousin more coffee. Stay one more day, she said. Eleanor Voss is having supper tomorrow. I'd like you to come. Dorothea looked up. Why? She said. Because I'd like you to see, Amelia said. Not to prove anything to you. Just, I'd like you to see. The Eleanor Voss supper was everything Amelia had hoped it would be, and a few things she had not planned for. Eleanor greeted the cousins with the particular warmth of a woman who has been briefed on a situation and has decided how she feels about it. She was kind in the way that people with real authority are kind from a position of security rather than performance. And she seated Dorothea beside her at the table and talked to her about Missouri with the interest of a woman who has lived in one place long enough to find all other places genuinely interesting. Robert shook Ruth's hand and asked about farming conditions in the Missouri Valley, and actually listened to the answer, which appeared to stun Ruth into a state of quiet pleasantness she had not previously demonstrated on the trip. And Ethan sat beside Amelia. He had been sitting beside her for 3 weeks now. At the kitchen table, at the Voss table, on the wagon bench. It had happened gradually, and then consistently, the way things settle into place when they are in the right place. But she was aware of it tonight in a different way. Aware of it because her cousins were watching, aware of it, because Eleanor was watching, aware of it, because something in the room felt like the last page of something turning. After supper, when the men had drifted to the front porch and the women had their tea. Eleanor looked at Dorothea with the directness she applied to most things. Your cousin is remarkable, she said. Dorothea said, I'm beginning to understand that. She walked into this county 3 weeks ago, and she sorted out a fraud that had been running for 3 years, presented the evidence in a territorial court proceeding, is currently preparing documentation for a deed challenge that would bankrupt most ranches, and she has done all of it without once asking for more credit than the work itself. Eleanor paused. She is the most capable woman I have met in 20 years of living in this county. Dorothea looked at her hands. We didn't know, she said. You didn't look, Eleanor said. Not unkindly, just accurately. The porch. Amelia stepped out to check on the men and found Ethan standing at the far railing, not talking to Robert. Robert was inside getting more tobacco, but standing alone, looking out at the dark, his hands resting on the wood. She came to stand beside him. He did not turn. He knew it was her. Your cousins, he said. They're trying, she said. I can see that, he said. Dorothea more than Ruth. Dorothea was always the more honest one, she said, even when her honesty was being weaponized. She paused. I don't know that I forgive her. I don't know that I need to for this to be what it is. What is it? He said. She thought about it. A closed chapter, she said. They came here, they saw. They said what they came to say. That's its own thing, separate from everything else. She paused. And everything else is here. He turned to look at her. The porch was lit from inside the house, and in that light, his face was exactly as she had come to know it. Angular and weathered, and holding more than it showed, always holding more than it showed. Amelia, he said. Yes, she said. I have to tell you something. She waited. He looked at her with the directness that she had learned was the only way he knew to look at something he considered important. I have been alone for 6 years, he said. And I have made peace with that I thought. Made it into something I could live with. The horses, the land, the work. He stopped. He looked at the dark. 3 weeks ago you sat down at my kitchen table at midnight with a lamp burning low, and you started telling me the truth about my own ranch, and I looked at you." He stopped again. She did not fill the silence. He said, "I don't know how to do this. I haven't done it. I'm not a man who says things like this easily." "I know," she said quietly. "Say it anyway." He looked at her. "You changed something," he said. "Not fixed it, not fixed me, changed it. The way a season changes it doesn't fix the previous one, it just arrives. And things are different." He paused. "I don't want you to be here because you have nowhere else to go. I don't want you to stay because leaving is harder than staying. I want—" He looked at his hands. "I want you to want to be here. Because I want you here. Not as a manager. Not as—" He stopped. "Ethan," she said. He looked up. "I wrote to Dorothea 3 weeks ago," she said. "I told her that in time I believed I would be a great deal more than a ranch manager." He stared at her. "You knew," he said. "3 weeks ago you knew." "I didn't know," she said. "I hoped. There's a difference. But it was the kind of hope that feels like it might be real." She looked at him steadily. "It feels very real right now." He reached up. He put his hand against her face carefully, the way he handled things. He valued his thumb at the edge of her jaw, his fingers barely touching. She did not move away. She put her hand over his. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He exhaled. It was the quietest sound she had ever heard from him, the most unguarded. "Good," he said very quietly. Robert chose that moment to come back out onto the porch, and he took one look at the two of them and turned around and went directly back inside. And they heard him say something to Eleanor in a low voice, and then heard Eleanor's quiet laugh. Ethan dropped his hand. Amelia looked at the dark. She was smiling genuinely fully, the way she had smiled in the kitchen when he told her about the laundry woman and Ferris. But this was different from that. This was the kind of smiling that comes from a place you have not visited in so long that you had almost stopped believing it existed. "The land hearing," she said when she trusted her voice. "Yes," he said. He was smiling too. She could hear it even though she was not looking at him. "I've been thinking about the approach," she said. "The judge in land court is a different judge than alderman. We need to think about what kind of argument will land with a man who doesn't already know the accounting documentation." "You want to talk about the land hearing," he said. "Right now." "I want to win the land hearing," she said. "And I think better when I'm talking through it." A pause. Then he laughed. That short, low, real laugh she had collected like currency. "All right," he said. "Talk me through it." She talked him through it. Standing on Eleanor Voss's porch in the summer dark, her shoulder against his arm, his hand occasionally covering hers on the railing. When she made a point he particularly agreed with, she talked him through the full strategy for the land court proceeding, and he listened and responded and pushed back where he saw gaps, and they built it together in the warm dark, while the mountain stood patient and enormous in the distance, and the light from inside the house held them in its edge. And when she finally paused, satisfied with what they had assembled, he said, "You know what you are." "Tell me," she said. "You are the most useful person," he said, "who has ever stood on this porch." She turned to look at him. His expression was straight. His eyes were not. She burst out laughing. He laughed with her, and inside the house. Eleanor Voss heard it, and set down her cup and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman who has been right about something for a very long time, and is not going to say so, because some satisfactions are best kept private. Dorothea and Ruth left the following morning. The goodbye at the wagon was brief and real, the way goodbyes are when everything important has already been said indoors. Dorothea embraced her properly for the first time since Amelia was perhaps 10 years old, and said nothing, and Amelia held the embrace for a moment, and felt something old and tight and long-held release in her chest, not gone, but changed, settled. Put somewhere she could look at it without it looking back with quite so much power. Ruth shook her hand, then seemed to reconsider and hugged her instead quickly, like someone jumping into cold water. The wagon went down the road. Ethan stood beside her on the porch. She watched the wagon turn the corner. She breathed. "All right," he said. Better than all right, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. The summer morning was full around them, warm and high, and the particular blue that Wyoming summer mornings produced, that no-compromise blue that did not exist in Missouri. The land hearing is in 6 weeks, she said. I know, he said. We have work to do, she said. We do, he said. Neither of them moved. He reached over and straightened the collar of her jacket, not because it needed straightening, and both of them knew it, and then left his hand on her shoulder for a moment. She put her hand over his. They stood like that for a moment in the morning light. Then she said, "Coffee first." "Coffee first," he agreed. They went inside. The land court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. The 6 weeks between this morning. Dorothea's wagon rounded the corner, and that Thursday were the most concentrated period of work Amelia had done in her life, and she had spent most of her life working. She built the case, the way she built everything methodically from the ground up, starting with what she knew for certain and working outward from there. The accounting documentation was the foundation, but a foundation is not an argument, and she understood that what the land court judge would need was not just numbers, but a story, the true story told in the right order, with the evidence arranged so that its meaning was impossible to miss. She spent the first 2 weeks going back through every piece of paper Ethan had kept from the years of his father's illness and death. Letters from the Territorial Land Office, the original deed, the transfer documents, the witness signatures. She had Ethan write down everything he remembered about the final weeks of his father's life, who was present, what was said, who had access to the house, who had been around when Thomas Blackwood was too ill to manage his own affairs. Drummond's name appeared twice in those recollections. Once as a man who had come to the house with a supply delivery during the final month. Once as a man who had asked Ethan in the week before Thomas died whether the old man had made his arrangements clear. She wrote that down. She underlined it. "I was already thinking about the deed," she said. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the paper in front of her and Ethan across from her. "A month before your father died. He was asking you about the arrangements." Ethan looked at the memory he had written down. "I thought he was just asking," he said. "Concern. He seemed concerned." "How was concerned?" she said. "About what would happen to his access to this ranch if the deed transferred clearly." She set down her pen. He needed ambiguity. He needed to be able to claim years later that the transfer was irregular, so he started building that claim before it was even needed. Ethan was very still. "He came to the house during your father's final month," she said. "You said your father was in poor health. Was he lucid?" "Some days," Ethan said. "Not all." "Did Drummond ever speak with your father privately?" "During that visit?" A long pause. "I was in the barn most of that afternoon," Ethan said slowly. "I came in and Drummond was in the front room. He said he'd looked in on my father to say hello." He stopped. He looked at her. "He said my father had asked to see him." She wrote that down. "That's how he built it," she said. "He spent time alone with a man whose lucidity was inconsistent in the final weeks of his life, and he manufactured a memory of a conversation in which Thomas Blackwood expressed doubt about the transfer." She looked up. "He never needed a document. He just needed a story. And he needed to be the only witness to the conversation that story was based on." Ethan's jaw was tight. "Can we disprove a conversation that may or may not have happened 6 years ago?" he said. "We don't need to disprove it," she said. "We need to show the judge who Cale Drummond is, a man who spent 3 years stealing from this ranch in small deliberate increments. A man who filed a deed challenge while still employed by you, while still accepting your wages and sitting at your table. A man whose pattern of behavior is consistent, calculated, and patient." She held his gaze. "We don't have to prove the conversation didn't happen. We have to make it impossible for a reasonable judge to believe anything Cale Drummond says." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You've done this before," he said. "This kind of thinking." "Never in a courtroom," she said. "But yes. I've spent my whole life figuring out how things actually work underneath the way they're presented." She paused. "It turns out that's useful." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Brief, firm. It is, he said. She turned back to the documents. They had work to do. Pruitt came to the ranch 2 weeks before the hearing. He came with news she had not expected, and it arrived in the particular way that unexpected things arrive when you are deep in preparation, like a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. He sat at the kitchen table, and he looked at both of them, and he said, "The Territorial Office dug back into Drummond's history before he came to Calder Ridge." Amelia set down her pen. "And," Ethan said. "He did this before," Pruitt said. "Not the accounting fraud, or not only that. 3 ranches back in Nebraska. He worked for a man named Gerald Holt. Holt died without a clear heir, and Drummond filed a claim suggesting Holt had promised him the land verbally in lieu of wages." Pruitt paused. "The claim didn't succeed, but it tied up the estate for 18 months and cost Holt's surviving relatives a significant amount in legal fees before it was settled." The kitchen was very quiet. Amelia looked at her notes. Then she looked at Pruitt. "He has a pattern," she said. "He does," Pruitt said. "And the Territorial Office is now aware of it. They're sending a representative to the land hearing. Someone from the main office who has access to the Nebraska records." She sat back. She looked at Ethan. I was looking at the table with the expression of a man who has just learned that what happened to him was not a personal failing, but a professional one. The work of someone who had done this before, who had found a method and refined it, who had come to Calder Ridge not just for wages, but for opportunity. "He came here on purpose," Ethan said. "I think so," Pruitt said. "I think he looked for a situation that matched his method. Single man, inherited land, trusts easily, and doesn't check closely." He paused. "I'm sorry, Ethan. That's the plain truth of it." "Don't apologize for the truth," Ethan said. "I'd rather know." "The Nebraska records," Amelia said. "Can you get them to me before the hearing?" "Already sent for them," Pruitt said. "Should arrive within the week." She nodded. She wrote something in her notebook. Pruitt looked at her. "You know the Territorial Land Court has an official process for—" "I know the process," she said. "I've been reading the territorial statutes for 2 weeks." She looked up. "The Nebraska records will establish pattern and practice. Combined with the accounting documentation, which establishes method and character, and the testimony about Drummond's access to Thomas Blackwood in his final weeks, I think we have a case that a reasonable judge cannot rule against." She paused. "Is the judge a reasonable man?" Pruitt almost smiled. "Judge Harlan Morse," he said. "He's been on the land court for 14 years. He's seen every version of this kind of claim from both sides. He has no patience for manufactured evidence and a great deal of patience for clear documentation." "Then we'll give him clear documentation," she said. Pruitt looked at Ethan. Ethan said, "She's been managing this since we found out. I'm just the man whose name is on the deed." "You're a great deal more than that," Amelia said without looking up from her notes. Pruitt put his hat on. He stood up. He looked between them with the expression of a man who is witnessing something he did not anticipate when he first drove out to a mountain ranch with a ledger full of bad news. "I'll have those Nebraska records to you by Friday," he said. "Thank you," she said. He left. Ethan looked at her. "You've been reading the territorial statutes," he said. "For 2 weeks," she said. "I told you." "Where did you get them?" "I wrote to the county seat and asked," she said. "They sent a copy by post. It took 4 days." He stared at her. "What?" she said. "You wrote to the county seat for the territorial statutes," he said. "On your own, without telling me." "I didn't want to alarm you until I knew what we were actually dealing with," she said. "Once I understood the scope of the land court process, I told you." He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, in something that was closer to wonder. "Amelia," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want you to know something," he said. She looked up. "Whatever happens in 6 weeks," he said. "Whatever the judge decides, whatever Drummond's claim comes to, I want you to know that you have already done more for this ranch and for me than I had any right to expect from any person." He paused. "And I intend to spend a considerable amount of time making sure you know that." She held his gaze. "You have 6 weeks to start," she said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Careful, deliberate the way he handled everything he valued. "I'll start now," he said. She looked back at her notes. She was smiling. The Nebraska records arrived on a Friday as promised. She read them in one sitting start to finish, and by the time she set them down, she had a clarity about what had happened, not just to Ethan, but to Gerald Holt in Nebraska, and possibly to others before that made something cold and focused settle in her chest. Drummond was not a desperate man. He was not a man driven by poverty or hunger, or the kind of immediate pressure that pushes ordinary people toward bad choices. He was a man who had found a methodology, who had discovered at some point that there was money and land available to a person, patient enough to get close to earn trust, to position himself for the moment when an estate became vulnerable, and who had applied that methodology with the deliberateness of a professional. How was good with horses because it gave him access. He was good with accounts, or convincingly mediocre with accounts in the right ways, because it gave him control. He came to funerals because funerals were where trust was most easily extended to familiar faces. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about Ethan saying, "a man who came to my father's funeral." She thought about the particular cruelty of that, not the cruelty of impulsive violence or hot-blooded anger, but the cold, patient cruelty of a man who understood exactly what he was doing and did it anyway, over and over to person after person, because he had decided that other people's trust was a resource available to him. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote for 3 hours. When she was done, she had the clearest, most comprehensive piece of legal documentation she had ever produced. Not just accounting records. A complete argument, chronological evidence cross-referenced between the Calder Ridge accounts and the Nebraska records, with the deed challenge addressed directly, and the pattern of behavior established so completely that refuting it would require a judge to decide in the face of all available evidence that coincidence was a more reasonable explanation than method. She went to find Ethan. He was in the barn with the horses, the specific mare that was due to foal within the month, a gray animal with a nervous disposition that he had been managing with particular patience. He was talking to her in a low voice as Amelia came in, not looking up, one hand moving slowly along the animal's neck. She stood in the doorway. She watched him with the horse. She thought, "This is the same man who sat down across from me at midnight with a broken ledger and answered every question I asked. The same man who stood in front of Marshall Pruitt and said she did the work that'll be known. The same man who moved on a wagon bench so that his arm was against mine, and then did not comment on it, or ask permission, or make it into something that required a response." She thought, "I have been here 2 months. She thought, "I have been waiting for the condition. The thing underneath the acceptance, the fine print, the expectation, the moment when being useful becomes being obligated, the moment when chosen becomes owned." She had been waiting. It had not come. "Ethan," she said. He looked up. "I'm done," she said. She held up the documentation. "It's ready." He left the horse. He came to her. He took the papers from her hands and looked at the first page and then looked at her face, and he did what he always did. He read the situation clearly and responded to what was actually there rather than what he expected. "You've been crying," he said. "I'm not anymore," she said. "What happened?" "Nothing happened," she said. "I read the Nebraska records, and I understood what he is, and I thought about all the people he's done this to, and I—" She stopped. "I'm angry," she said. "On your behalf, and on behalf of Gerald Holt, and whoever else came before. And I'm tired of men like that having the patience and the access and the time, and the people they take from having to scramble to prove something that should never have needed proving." He was looking at her. "I'm all right," she said. "I know you are," he said. "You're also angry. Both things are true." She looked at the documentation in his hands. "That will win the hearing," she said. "I am as certain of that as I have been certain of anything." He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked at her. "I know," he said. "I knew it the minute you started working on it." He paused. "I want to ask you something." "Ask it. After the hearing," he said. "After this is settled. What do you want?" She blinked. "What? What do you want?" he said again. "Not what the ranch needs. Not what I need. What do you want for yourself? going forward? She had not been asked that question in so long that the shape of it was almost unfamiliar. She looked at him. This, she said. I want this, the work, the ranch, the accounts and the supply schedules and the kitchen garden and Sunday supper at Eleanor's. She paused. I want to stop being somewhere provisional. I want to be somewhere I am not waiting to be asked to leave. He said, You will never be asked to leave. That's not something you can promise, she said carefully. People's circumstances change. People's feelings change. I've learned not to build too much on Amelia. His voice was quiet and very firm. I am asking you to marry me. The barn went completely still. She stared at him. He did not look away. He did not soften the directness of it, or surround it with elaborate preamble, or look at the floor. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the train platform the first day, like a man who has decided what he is looking at and has no interest in looking anywhere else. That's not... She stopped. You're not asking because of the hearing. I'm asking because of every morning for the past 2 months, he said. I'm asking because of midnight and the lamp oil running low. I'm asking because you weeded my garden while you were thinking about accounting fraud, and because you laughed in my kitchen, and because you told my cousin-in-law Ferris that you were the ranch manager with a calm that I have never seen from anyone in my life. He paused. I'm asking because I am 38 years old, and I have been alone for 6 years, and I did not understand until you sat down at that table what it was costing me. She looked at him. Her heart was doing something she had no vocabulary for. I'm not easy to live with, she said. I work constantly. I have opinions about everything. I will reorganize your systems without asking. You already have, he said. 3 times. The ranch runs better. I write letters that say difficult things. I know, he said. I read the one to Dorothea. She stared at him. You read it. You left it on the table before you sealed it, he said. I didn't read it to pry. I read it because it was there, and because... The corner of his mouth moved. Because I wanted to know what you'd say when you stopped holding back. She looked at the hay bale. She looked at the mare. She looked at her hands. She said, yes. He exhaled. That quiet, unguarded sound. Yes, she said again, steadier. The answer is yes. He crossed to her. He put both hands on her face, careful, certain, and he looked at her for a long moment before he bent his head and kissed her. Not tentative, not polite. The kiss of a man who has been certain for longer than he said and is finally done waiting. She held onto his vest with both hands. The gray mare shifted in her stall. Neither of them noticed. The land hearing was on a Thursday as scheduled. Judge Harlan Morse was 60 years old, thin-shouldered, with the eyes of a man who had been lied to, professionally, for most of his adult life and had developed a fine-grained ability to detect it. He convened the hearing with efficiency and without theater. And he looked at the stack of documentation on the table in front of him, and then at the people in the room with the particular attention of someone who is about to separate what is real from what is not. Drummond was present again. His attorney was a different man, this time older, with the look of someone who had read the room and was managing expectations rather than building a case. Drummond himself looked like a man who had spent 6 weeks deciding something and had arrived at the decision but was not comfortable with it. The Territorial Office representative, a man named Kavanaugh, sat to one side with the Nebraska records. Ethan sat beside Amelia at the front table. She presented the documentation herself at Judge Morse's request for the same reason she had presented it to Judge Alderman, because she had built it and she knew every word of it, and because the person who does the work is always the person who can answer the questions. She walked him through it, calmly, completely. She connected the Nebraska records to the Calder Ridge pattern without editorializing the facts, did the editorializing themselves. She laid out the timeline of Drummond's employment, his access, his presence in the house. During Thomas Blackwood's final weeks, the nature of the deed challenge, and the identical methodology he had employed against Gerald Holt. When she finished, Judge Morse was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Drummond's attorney. Does your client have documentation of any kind supporting the claim that Thomas Blackwood expressed doubt about the deed transfer? No, Your Honor. The claim is based on verbal testimony. From your client alone? Yes, Your Honor. Morse looked at Drummond. Mr. Drummond, he said, you have pleaded guilty in a separate proceeding to the theft of wages from Blackwood Ranch over a period of 3 years. He paused. You filed this deed challenge 6 months ago while still employed by Mr. Blackwood. Another pause. And you have a prior proceeding in Nebraska in which you made a materially similar claim against the estate of a deceased rancher. Drummond said nothing. I'm going to ask you one question, Morse said. And I want you to think carefully before you answer it because your answer will be entered into the record of this proceeding and will be available to any court in this territory going forward. He looked at Drummond directly. Did Thomas Blackwood ever express to you in any form doubt or reluctance regarding the transfer of Blackwood Ranch to his son Ethan? A long silence. The room was very still. Drummond looked at Ethan for the first time since the proceeding had begun. Ethan looked back at him. Steady, calm, not angry, just there. Drummond looked down. No, he said. He didn't. The room erupted. Amelia sat still. Ethan put his hand over hers on the table. She turned her hand over and held it. Judge Morse called for order. He got it within 30 seconds. He looked at the documentation in front of him, and then at the room, and then at Drummond's attorney. The challenge is dismissed, he said. The deed transfer is confirmed as valid. Mr. Drummond, you are advised that any future claims of this nature, given the pattern now established in the territorial record, will be reviewed with a presumption of bad faith. He closed the folder. We are adjourned. She did not cry at the hearing. She cried in the wagon on the way home, which surprised her. She had thought she was past. The crying had thought the anger had used up the available emotion. But the moment they were out of town, and the road was climbing toward the mountains, and Ethan's shoulder was against hers, something released in her that she had not known was still held. She did not make a production of it. She cried the way she did most things, quietly, with restraint, without asking for anything. But he noticed immediately the way he always noticed, and he put his arm around her without a word, and pulled her against his side, and she let herself lean. It's done, he said. I know, she said. You did that, he said. Everything that happened in that room today, you built it. We built it, she said. Amelia. Ethan. He tightened his arm. She closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about the train platform, the blue handkerchief, his hands on her bag before she'd had a chance to argue about it. She thought about midnight in the kitchen, and the lamp oil running low, and the first morning she had laughed, and the evening on the porch when he had put his arm against hers and said nothing about it. She thought about her mother, who had said, understand a thing before you judge it. She thought, I understand this. I understand it completely. And it is the best thing that has ever been true about my life. She opened her eyes. There's something I want to tell you, she said. Tell me, he said. That first night, she said, when I came to you and showed you what I'd found in the ledger, you said you trusted Drummond because he came to your father's funeral. You said you thought you knew his character. She paused. And then you said he'd come to the funeral, and he'd shaken your hand, and he'd said your father was a good man. Yes, Ethan said. And I thought that night sitting across from you, I thought this man has been carrying something that was never his to carry. The guilt of having trusted someone who was already planning to take from him. She paused. I wanted to tell you that then, but I didn't have the right yet. He was quiet. I have the right now, she said. So I'm telling you, what Drummond did was not a product of your trust. Your trust was real, and it was offered honestly, and it was betrayed. Those are two separate things. The betrayal doesn't erase the trust. It doesn't mean you were foolish. It means he was something you had no way of knowing he was. She looked up at him. Your father's funeral was real. The man who stood at that graveside, that was not entirely a performance. And you loved him for a real thing, even if he wasn't worthy of the whole of it. He looked at the road. He said nothing for a long time. Then quietly, how do you know that? Because I've watched you for 2 months, she said. And you are the least foolish person I have ever known. You are precise, and you are careful, and you do not give your trust easily. The fact that Drummond was able to earn it means he was very good at something, not that you were careless with something. A long silence. He exhaled. "I'll think about that," he said. "Good," she said. "That's all I'm asking." The wagon climbed. The ranch came into view around the last bend. She had been looking at this view for 2 months now, and it had done something over those months, shifted from unfamiliar to known, to finally something she did not have a precise word for. Something that lived in her chest, in the same place that useful and chosen, and I don't want you to leave lived. Home, maybe. The word was simple and enormous, and she had not let herself use it yet. She let herself use it now. "There it is," Ethan said. "There it is," she agreed. He pulled the wagon up to the front of the house. He climbed down. He came around. He offered his hand. She took it and climbed down and did not let go. They stood together in the summer afternoon, the mountains at their backs, and the ranch spread out before them, and the gray mare watching from the pasture, with the patient attention of an animal that has learned that the people around her have finally settled into something worth trusting. "I keep thinking about what you said," Ethan said, on the porch at Eleanor's, about a closed chapter. "Yes," she said. "This isn't a closed chapter," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's an open one." He looked at the house, at the garden she had tended, at the barn where the horses moved in the afternoon warmth. "I thought I was giving you a place to stay," he said. She looked at him. "But you gave me a reason to come home." She held on to his hand. The summer afternoon held them both. The mountains said nothing, the way they always said nothing. Patient and enormous and indifferent in the way that is, if you look at it right, its own kind of kindness. And Amelia Parker, who had been sent as a joke, who had arrived with 1 bag and $7, and the kind of courage that does not announce itself, who had sat down at a stranger's kitchen table at midnight and told him the truth about his own life, stood in the summer light on the porch of the home she had chosen, and held the hand of the man who had chosen her back, and felt for the first time in all her 27 years, the particular and irreplaceable peace of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone put her there, because she walked there herself, and she was never ever